This is a rather interesting one. It's not part of the main research thrust that I've done on political polarization. It's kind of a side point that I had heard, and I wanted to cover it. Like when I heard that there is Samara Klar out of the University of Arizona did a survey that showed that Israelis and Palestinians hate each other as much as red and blue sides in America. So when you hear stuff like that, you're like, wow, that's not exactly part of the discussion. But it's such an extreme point that could really inform the whole discussion. So I heard something recently and it terrified me. And that's when I reached out to John B. Allcock, an internationally recognized expert on the Bosnia conflict. John B. Allcock teaches at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. In addition to undergraduate teaching a wide variety of areas of discipline, I became an internationally recognized specialist in the study of the former Yugoslavia. Served as an advisor to the Foreign Affairs Committee to the House of Commons as an expert witness to the International War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague. He's an international expert on the Bosnia conflict, recognized around the planet. He wrote this book, Conflict in Former Yugoslavia, an encyclopedia. And then he also wrote this article, came out in 2002, The Rural-Urban Differences and the Breakup of Yugoslavia by John B. Allcock. I'm going to get to that in a second, but I want you to hear this first. So the reason I picked up on him was because I was watching another person being interviewed. Recently, U.S. Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor said that the urban-rural divide that is causing division in America is similar to what he saw in Bosnia and how its conflict started. So a U.S. Army colonel served in Bosnia said last couple weeks here in America, the urban-rural divide and the amount of hate and political polarization in America is so bad, it reminds him similar to the conflict he saw in Bosnia. Think about that for a second. The conflict in Bosnia, the amount of hate that those ethnic groups had. Here's a U.S. Army colonel who was in Bosnia, saw these people hating each other, and is now back in America years later and going, damn, the rural-urban divide in America is very close to what I saw in Bosnia, right when people were trying to kill each other in a civil war. Let me play that for you. This is it. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, the U.S. government lied about the Ukraine war, part 1, 2. It's out of an interview done in London, but here's what he said.
Get that far. If we do, again, the problems, I grew up in a city, North Philadelphia, where there hasn't been a free, fair election in 50, 60 years. And I won't go over the history. That's a problem in all the large cities. So you just write them off. The only way that you could run a free and fair election would be to declare martial law. And then you'd have to confirm the validity of people's identity and their citizenship. You might get a different outcome. I think you probably would. But that's not going to happen. So what happens? And everyone that lives everywhere else, it's a different world. So you have two worlds. You know, it's almost rural versus urban in some ways, reminiscent of what I saw in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But it's worse.
It's almost rural versus urban, as we've been talking about. Red states rural, blue states blue, or urban. As I saw in Bosnia, and he was there. So initially I heard that and I thought that's got to be hyperbole. So I looked up rural-urban differences in the breakup of Yugoslavia, and I found John Allcock, who's an expert. And here's what he said. I believe that it was the rural-urban divide in Bosnia a big reason for the conflict. I believe that it was a significant and underrated factor in the development of the conflict. So here's the international expert on Bosnia saying, you know, a lot of people talked about genocide. They talked about ethnic differences. Yeah, those were there. But the rural-urban divide was not the main reason, a huge, huge reason why things got so bad there. And it was under-acknowledged. So when people were looking at Bosnia, they were not recognizing the division of rural-urban divide there. And they didn't pick up on that. And so this is an expert of the Bosnia conflict, an internationally recognized expert saying most of the planet got it wrong. They did not recognize the urban-rural divide in the Bosnia conflict, and it was a huge reason for that. Totally backing up what this Army colonel said. So Army colonel was there, said the rural-urban divide was a huge reason in Bosnia for the conflict. Here's an international expert on Bosnia saying, yeah, the rural-urban divide was a big reason for the conflict. He also wrote a paper where he said the same thing. Here's John Allcock, international expert. In 2002, rural-urban differences in the breakup of Yugoslavia, there has been widespread debate over the possible causes of the breakup of the former Yugoslav Federation, but relatively little attention has been paid to the importance of rural-urban differences in this process. The central claim of the article is that the economic, political, and social exclusion which some specific segments of the Yugoslav rural population came to experience in relation to the urban-centered system can be regarded as having played an important contributory part in the genesis and course of the struggles surrounding the disintegration of Yugoslavia. Yugoslav rural population came to experience in relation to the urban-centered system. This broad hypothesis is explored through brief discussions of two case studies, the Serb Krajina in Croatia and the Herceg Bosna, while expressly rejecting a single-factor explanations of the change. The author argues that in looking for explanations of the phenomenon of secession in these classes, we need to be able to take into consideration the profound state of economic depression into which these areas had fallen. There has been widespread debate over the possible causes of the breakup of the former Yugoslav Federation, encompassing a broad choice of political, economic, and cultural factors within the country, as well as aspects of its international setting, which might be considered to have undermined the integrity of the state. Relatively little attention has been paid, however, to the importance of rural-urban differences in the development of these social and political conflicts. I set out in this paper to remind the reader of the importance of this dimension. The central hypothesis of this paper is that economic, political, and social exclusion, which some specific segments of the Yugoslav rural population came to experience in relation to the urban-centered system, can be regarded as having played an important contributory part in the genesis and course of the struggle surrounding the breakup of the former federation. This broad hypothesis is explored here through the medium of two specific regional case studies. I'm looking for a specific thing. The general difference between urban and rural cultures have been commented upon extensively by sociologists and anthropologists and are sufficiently well established not to require detailed elaboration in this context. They include, typically inter alia, the predominance of industrial and commercial occupations, a higher degree of secularization, wider distribution of education, higher standards of living, smaller family size, reduced importance of kinship, greater exposure to mass communication, and greater involvement in organized political activity on the part of urban in comparison to rural populations. Within these divides are commonly associated with the urban-rural divides in all parts of the world. The creation of differentiated urban cultures in the Balkans has generally been intensified by the historical association of cities with ethnic differences. The creation of differentiated urban cultures in the Balkans has generally been intensified by the historical association of cities with ethnic difference. Under the great imperial powers, Habsburg, Ottoman, and Venetian, the cities were identified with Austrian, Magyar, or Ottoman ruling elites, and typically also with commercial and financial interests, which were differentiated on ethnic grounds such as Jews, Sincar's, Greeks, Ragusans, or Germans. In the former Ottoman regions, urban-rural differences tended to be made more visible by the institution of Millet. This overlays of ethnic difference intensified the perception of cities by the country people as foreign and oppressive, and the villages by the town dwellers as ignorant and backwards. So the impression was people living in the countryside are poor and rural and part of one ethnic group, and they're all part of that ethnic group. The only place you see people who aren't part of this one dominant ethnic group is the cities. The cities have all these different ethnic people in them, and they're higher educated. So cities are full of lots of people of different ethnicities, rural areas full of one ethnicity, and it's less educated than the cities. So the cities start looking down on the rural countryside as backwards and single ethnic and, country boy, Fox News, yeehaw, inbred hicks. And the rural people start to say, well, those people in the city aren't even our own ethnic group. They're really a bunch of foreigners, and they look down on us. And he was saying, John Allcock, the expert, saying that's what caused the Bosnia conflict. You had cities that were seen as diverse and super well-educated and metropolitan and cosmopolitan. And the countryside was full of one ethnic group, which was not doing well economically and not as educated, and would look at the cities and go, those are a bunch of people who aren't us, and look down on us. Well, what's happening in America today? When Donald Trump was elected, they were routinely talking about how Trump's doing well in the heartland. Why? Because those people feel the liberal elites in the cities have looked down on them. And so that's the point. Trump did very well in the heartland. Liberals were shocked. And the answer has been from many liberals and conservatives that Trump's message resonated with them. They felt that they were being ignored by mainstream liberal news, and they were being looked down and castigated by mainstream liberal news. And so when Trump fought back with the media, they loved it. That's why Trump fighting the media was something he did, because his population liked that. So fast forward, in Bosnia, rural people, one ethnic group, they felt, oh, those diverse cities, a bunch of metropolitan, different ethnic groups who look down on us. Now where are we at? Rural America is almost all white, male, conservative, Fox News watching. The cities are almost all diverse. Almost all cities are not conservative. And rural people look at the cities and say, that's a bunch of people who ain't us and don't have our culture. That dynamic happening in America today is at least a major contributor to what led to Bosnia and all the death. So rural-urban divisions can get really, really, really bad to the point that they end up like Bosnia. That's what this internationally recognized expert on Bosnia said. That's a shocking and damning enough conclusion on its own. We'll leave it there. We're knocking out a bunch today. So we had these out and we were preparing them for a while, and now we're getting them out today. So there's going to be a lot coming out today, brother. All right, we'll leave it there. Kind of a shocking conclusion, but something to recognize.